My name is Mark. I am 52 years old, and for most of my life I believed that being a father had nothing to do with blood. I believed it was measured in sacrifice, in showing up every single day, in carrying burdens without asking for applause. That belief guided every major decision I made for nearly 16 years. Looking back now, I wonder whether I was building a family, or simply financing the illusion of one. When I married Brandon's mother, he was only 6 years old. His biological father drifted in and out of his life like bad weather. A birthday phone call. A Christmas card every few years. Empty promises that never became memories. While another man disappeared whenever responsibility came knocking, I stayed. I attended parent-teacher conferences. I helped with homework after 10-hour workdays. I coached him through broken hearts, bad grades, and teenage mistakes. I never introduced him as my stepson. Whenever people asked, I simply said, "That's my boy." Running a small construction company was never glamorous. Every contract meant risk. Every delayed payment meant another sleepless night wondering how to make payroll for the men who depended on me. My hands became rough from years of lifting lumber and concrete. My knees reminded me every morning that I wasn't 30 anymore. Yet every time Brandon needed something, I convinced myself there was always room for one more sacrifice. When he wanted to play hockey, I paid for the equipment that cost more than I cared to admit. When he joined traveling tournaments, I covered hotels, gas, and registration fees without complaint. When he turned 16, I surprised him with his first car. It wasn't a luxury vehicle, but it was reliable and safe. The smile on his face that afternoon made every overtime shift feel worthwhile. College came next. The tuition bills arrived with frightening regularity, but I never allowed Brandon to see my concern. I paid every semester. Books, housing, meal plans, laptops, emergency expenses that somehow appeared every few months. Whenever he called saying he was short on money, I transferred it before he finished explaining why. My wife often told me I didn't have to do so much. "He isn't your responsibility," she would say. I always answered the same way. "He became my responsibility the day I married you." I meant every word. Brandon rarely thanked me, but I convinced myself gratitude wasn't important. Young people often failed to appreciate sacrifice until much later in life. At least that's what I kept telling myself whenever another payment left my account. Years passed that way. I watched him graduate from college. I celebrated when he found his first decent job. I helped him furnish his apartment because starting out was expensive. Every milestone in his life carried a piece of my labor, even if no one else could see it. Then he met Caitlin. She was confident, outspoken, and always seemed to enjoy expensive things. At first, I wanted to believe she genuinely loved Brandon. I welcomed her into our family without hesitation. I paid for dinners when they visited. I helped repair their old apartment after a plumbing leak. When Brandon proposed, I shook his hand and hugged him like any proud father would. A few weeks later, he came into my office carrying a folder filled with wedding estimates. "I don't know how we're going to afford all this," he admitted. I barely looked at the numbers before answering. "We'll figure it out." Those 4 words cost me more than I realized. The venue overlooked a beautiful lake. The catering was extravagant. The photographer had won awards. Every choice seemed larger than the last, but whenever Brandon looked uncertain, I reminded him that a wedding only happened once. So I wrote the checks, one after another. When the florist requested another deposit, I paid it. When the band increased their price, I covered the difference. When Brandon quietly admitted they were struggling to save for a down payment on a house, I promised to help with that too after the wedding. He smiled. My wife kissed me and called me the most generous man she'd ever known. For a brief moment, I believed everything had been worth it. I thought the wedding would be the day I finally felt like more than a provider. I couldn't have imagined that, before the night was over, 16 years of sacrifice would be reduced to laughter echoing across a ballroom floor. The wedding day arrived beneath a clear summer sky, the kind of morning people describe as perfect. The venue overlooked a quiet lake, with white chairs lined in perfect rows and flowers arranged so carefully that not a single petal seemed out of place. Every detail reflected months of planning and an amount of money that still made my stomach tighten whenever I thought about it. As guests admired the decorations, the elegant reception hall, and the expensive menu, very few of them knew that nearly every check had been signed by me. I stood near the entrance greeting relatives, shaking hands with old friends, and accepting compliments about how beautiful everything looked. Every "congratulations" carried an odd weight. They believed I was simply the proud stepfather watching a young couple begin their future. None of them realized I had spent years building that future long before the ceremony ever began. Brandon looked happy. I watched him laugh with his friends, pose for photographs, and embrace relatives who had rarely been present during the difficult years. His biological father even appeared for the ceremony, arriving just in time to walk through the crowd as though he had always belonged there. People welcomed him warmly. Some even thanked him for raising such a fine young man. He accepted every compliment without correcting anyone. I remained silent. I had grown used to silence. The ceremony itself passed without incident. Brandon and Caitlin exchanged vows beneath a flower-covered arch while guests wiped tears from their eyes. My wife squeezed my hand during the applause, whispering that we had done a wonderful job. For a moment, despite everything, I felt proud. Maybe none of the sacrifices had been acknowledged openly, but watching Brandon begin a new chapter almost convinced me they had still been worthwhile. The reception began with music, laughter, and endless toasts. Crystal glasses clinked together while servers carried expensive meals from table to table. The band played every song Brandon had requested, and the dance floor quickly filled with smiling faces. I stood off to one side, enjoying the sight more than participating in it. I never liked being the center of attention. As the evening continued, Caitlin seemed to drink more with every passing hour. Her laughter became louder, her movements less careful. Guests dismissed it as harmless celebration. I noticed something different. Every time she walked past me, she wore a smile that never reached her eyes. Eventually I found myself standing near the dance floor speaking with one of Brandon's uncles. We were discussing work, completely removed from the celebration, when I heard high heels approaching across the polished floor. Caitlin stopped directly in front of me. "You're blocking the photographers," she said with an impatient smile. I looked around. There was more than enough room, but I stepped aside anyway. I had no interest in arguing on their wedding day. Apparently, that wasn't enough. Without another word, she planted both hands firmly against my chest and shoved me with surprising force. I lost my balance instantly. My heel slipped on the polished marble, and I crashed backward onto the floor. Pain shot through my shoulder as my body struck the stone. The music stopped in the middle of a song. Somewhere nearby, someone dropped a champagne glass, and the sharp sound echoed through the silent ballroom. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. For one brief second, I expected Brandon to rush over and help me stand. Instead, he wrapped one arm around his wife, smiled, leaned toward her ear, and whispered something that made her burst into laughter. That sound hurt far more than the fall itself. In that single moment, 16 years of sacrifice became perfectly clear. I wasn't family. I was simply the man expected to keep paying. I stayed on the floor for only a moment. My shoulder throbbed where it had struck the marble, but the pain barely registered. What hurt far more was the image standing a few feet away from me. Brandon wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't angry at his new wife. He wasn't reaching down to help the man who had spent 16 years carrying him through life. He was smiling. That smile erased every excuse I had ever made for him. I pushed myself to my feet, straightened my jacket, and brushed the dust from my sleeves. The room remained silent. Guests watched me carefully, waiting for an explosion. Some expected shouting. Others expected me to storm out of the ballroom. A few looked toward security, anticipating the kind of family scene people gossip about for years afterward. They were all wrong. I looked once at Brandon. He finally met my eyes, but there was no apology waiting there. Caitlin leaned against him, still laughing softly as though knocking me to the floor had been part of the entertainment. Something inside me became perfectly still. Anger disappeared. So did disappointment. All that remained was clarity. I turned away from them and walked calmly toward the stage. Every step echoed through the silent ballroom. The band members stood frozen beside their instruments. The wedding photographer lowered his camera, unsure whether to continue working. Even the waiter stopped moving between the tables. The master of ceremonies watched me approach with a nervous expression. "Mark," he began quietly. "May I borrow the microphone?" I asked. He hesitated for only a second before handing it to me. I thanked him with a nod and stepped to the center of the stage. 300 faces stared back at me. No one spoke. No one moved. I adjusted the microphone and took a slow breath. "First," I said, "I'd like to thank every one of you for coming here today. Brandon and Caitlin are fortunate to have so many people willing to celebrate the beginning of their marriage." Several guests exchanged confused glances. My voice remained calm. "There is something I'd like to share before the evening continues." I looked toward Brandon. His smile had disappeared. For nearly 16 years, I've had the privilege of helping raise Brandon. During those years, I paid for his hockey equipment, his school activities, his first car, his college tuition, his apartment, his insurance, and countless other expenses that helped him become the man standing here tonight. The room grew even quieter. I never mentioned those things because I believed fathers shouldn't keep score. I paused. But tonight, I think everyone deserves to understand why this wedding exists in the first place. I slowly turned toward the beautifully decorated ballroom. "The venue you're sitting in." I pointed toward the elegant ceiling. "I paid for it." I gestured toward the tables covered with flowers and crystal glasses. "The catering, the decorations, the band, the photographer, the open bar." I allowed my eyes to travel across the room. "I paid for those too." Across the ballroom I noticed Caitlin's father, Jack. The color drained from his face. He slowly lowered the champagne glass he had been holding and stared at me with complete disbelief. He hadn't known. Almost no one had. I continued speaking with the same steady voice. "There is one more expense very few people know about." I reached into my jacket pocket and removed a folded envelope. After the wedding, I was scheduled to provide the down payment for Brandon and Caitlin's first home. Those funds are still in my account. Brandon suddenly took 2 quick steps toward the stage. "Mark, please." I raised one hand. "I'm not finished." The ballroom was so quiet that I could hear someone breathing in the front row. Then I unfolded the paper in my hand. "My support ends tonight." The words landed harder than any shout ever could. No one spoke. The silence was so complete that I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning above the ballroom. Hundreds of guests stared at me, waiting for the rest of my sentence, while Brandon stood frozen halfway between his table and the stage. For the first time that evening, he looked uncertain. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into my jacket. "Effective immediately," I continued. "Every unpaid expense connected to this wedding has been cancelled. Any remaining balances with the venue, the catering company, the florist, the entertainment, or any other vendor will now become the responsibility of the bride and groom." A wave of whispers rolled across the room. I didn't raise my voice. "There will also be no down payment for a house. No additional financial support. No future checks. No emergency transfers. No hidden safety net waiting to rescue anyone from the consequences of their own decisions." Brandon climbed onto the first step leading to the stage. "Mark, please don't do this." I looked directly at him. I already did. His face turned pale. "You can't mean that." "I've never been more certain of anything." Caitlin finally stepped forward, her confidence gone. "It was a joke," she said. "I didn't mean to push you that hard." I nodded slowly. "Perhaps." She looked relieved for a brief second. "But your husband laughed while I was lying on the floor." Her expression changed immediately. "There are jokes," I continued. And then there are moments that reveal exactly what people think of you. No one interrupted. I turned toward the guests once more. I have never asked Brandon to repay a single dollar I spent raising him. Every payment was given freely because I believed I was helping my son build a better future. I paused before adding quietly, but respect cannot be purchased. And once respect disappears, generosity has no foundation left to stand on. Across the ballroom I saw Jack slowly walking toward the stage. He stopped a few feet away from me. "Mark," he said quietly, "did you really pay for all of this?" "Almost all of it." His eyes moved around the magnificent reception hall. "The venue?" "Yes." "The catering?" "Yes." "The band?" "Yes." "The honeymoon deposit?" "Yes." Jack looked at his daughter. She couldn't meet his eyes. Then he looked at Brandon. "You told us both families were sharing the costs." Brandon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Jack let out a long breath before shaking his head slowly. "I had no idea." Either did most of the guests. People began looking at Brandon differently. Conversations spread from table to table. One relative quietly asked another whether everything I had said was true. Someone else answered before Brandon could. "It is. Mark's been paying for that boy since he was a kid." More whispers followed. Some guests lowered their heads in embarrassment. Others stared openly at the newlyweds. The atmosphere that had felt joyful only minutes earlier had completely changed. No argument could erase the truth now. I placed the microphone back into the MC's hands. "I'm finished." The MC stood speechless. I stepped down from the stage without looking back. No one tried to stop me. Not Brandon. Not my wife. Not Caitlin. As I walked across the ballroom, guests silently moved aside to clear a path. Several nodded respectfully. An elderly couple reached out and briefly touched my arm without saying a word. Outside, the evening air felt cool against my face. Behind me, I could hear the confused murmur of hundreds of conversations beginning all at once. The reception continued. But it was no longer a celebration. It had become a reckoning. I unlocked my truck, placed my suit jacket on the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. For several minutes, I simply looked through the windshield. 16 years. Thousands of hours. Countless sacrifices. In the end, I hadn't destroyed a family. I had merely stopped pretending that I belonged to one.